Google is like, give me all the data, I'm going to stick it in my cloud, I'm going to tell you what you need to know. People are happy to trade their privacy for utility all day long.
They wanted to make a genuine product in their own right that would win in the marketplace. And they have spent 10 long years getting to the point where that product can compete head-on with Samsung, can compete head-on with Apple. One of the lessons for founders here is about patience.
Just make the next version of the device and make it better. That's it.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a Reacts episode.
Hi, I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
And I'm Chris Saad.
And in today's episode of the Startup Podcast, Google releases the Pixel 10. Is this a boring event? We don't think so. We think maybe this time it's different. Is the age-old battle between Apple and Google, between iPhone and Android, between I'm a Mac and I'm a PC, is it moving onto a new dimension? And is it the time, finally, when Google gets the leg up on Apple? We're going to go deep into all of the different industry trends that are feeding where we are up to today and talk about some of the lessons that founders can learn about this titanic battle. Stay tuned for all of that right after the break. Today's episode of the Startup Podcast is brought to you by .tech domains. One thing about starting your startup that should be easy but isn't is naming it. Why is it so hard? Because all the good .com domain names are taken. So you end up doing something silly like misspelling it or adding random prefixes or suffixes. No more. Your domain shows your focus and intent, so you should make it sharp, clean, and unmistakably tech with a .tech domain. Head to get.tech/TSP or a registrar like GoDaddy to grab your .tech domain today. That's www.get.tech/TSP for the Startup Podcast.
All right, for today's episode, we're going to dive deep into Google's Made by Google event 2025, where they announced the Pixel Series 10. Interesting event, actually. Firstly, it was less hardware keynote from stodgy old tech company and more Jimmy Fallon style talk show, including the whole, like, let's go to a bench and cook up a meal, except the meal was like Pixel devices. It was actually, for those kind of events can become, when they try to do something cutesy and, with celebrities and whatever, it can be really awkward and weird silences and executives trying to keep up and trying to be funny. I actually thought it was better than normal, better than usual. The execs were keeping up better. Jimmy's enthusiasm was filling the gaps. He's very self-effacing and he was sort of self-aware and it actually wasn't as cringy as you might expect. They announced the Pixel 10 series, the 10, 10 Pro, 10 Pro XL, the foldable, the new Tensor G5 chip and all this sort of stuff. But specifically, they announced a lot of additional incremental AI stuff. They announced Qi 2 charging with Pixel Snap, which is basically the magnets that make your phone stick to the charger. Magic Q, which is this, as you're typing, as you're texting, the AI is proactively suggesting things for you. Like people say, when are you flying in or when are you arriving in Dubai, it'll actually tell you it'll give you a little suggested response.
Based on what it's seen in your email or whatever it is, yeah.
Yeah, if you're calling up, if it says, hey, you should call the airline and change that flight, it'll actually give you a button to press to call the airline. And then as you're calling the airline, it'll actually give you your reservation information right on the call screen. So it's really, really proactive and really they've baked AI deeply into the OS. And there's talk about adding Gemini to Google Home and Assistant, which is a bit of a no shit situation. Just, I don't know why it's taking them so long. It was a full-throated, full-suite AI first device launch. I don't know, Yaniv, did you manage to watch the launch? What did you make of it? And keep in mind, Apple is coming up next, early mid September as well.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting. And I think, Chris, you're a Mac, I'm a PC when it comes to phones. Like, to be clear, I've got a Mac on my computer. I love Apple, but I actually find iPhones recently to have been quite underwhelming, right? And I feel like what has happened is the battlefield has moved from a sort of integrated hardware and software ecosystem to being much more about software, but being about software in a way that actually advantages Google more than it advantages Apple. Right. And, I'm not just saying this out of pure fanboyery. I actually spent over a year with an iPhone just 18 months ago, and I went back to my Pixel because I preferred it. And, that's in contrast to, for example, the other parts of the Apple ecosystem. What did I miss? I missed my Apple Watch. I somewhat missed my AirPods, but I did not miss the iPhone. And where iPhone has really differentiated itself from, say, the Pixel series in recent years, I don't think has been on the software and the quality of the user experience, Chris. You may disagree. That's my personal experience. But Apple has had the better hardware. It has had better design, better build quality, better battery life, faster processor, and so on. And the Pixel series has always kind of struggled a bit with that. And so where I see this announcement fitting, Chris, is that on the hardware side, what the Google team have done is basically try to shut down any of the weak points. They're not trying to move ahead into anything, but they're saying, let's get rid of any of those niggles, right? So somewhat improved build quality. They've moved the new Tensor G5 chip. I think this is an interesting sidebar. So Google, like Apple, have had their own line of mobile CPUs for some time. But unlike Apple's M series, which are the fastest, most energy efficient mobile chips in the world, the Google Tensor series has been kind of dogged by being both slow and battery inefficient. So, fancy word for kind of shit. And with the Tensor G5, they've actually moved from using, I believe it was Samsung as the foundry, to TSMC. Now, TSMC, you will have heard about on this show and elsewhere. It is the leading, most advanced chip maker in the world. And so with the Tensor G5, what Google have managed to do is say, this is still not the best performing chip out there, but it is fast enough and it is energy efficient for the first time. So that criticism goes away. They continue to make leaps in computational photography. You mentioned the Qi 2 charging, right? So there was limited, Apple had the sort of MagSafe ecosystem. Google didn't have anything to match. Now they do. So basically, you're looking at a phone, and phones have only incrementally improved over the last few years, where you're like, there is nothing particularly wrong with this phone. It might not be the best in any one aspect, but there is nothing particularly wrong with this phone, which then brings the battlefield to the software side. And in particular, Chris, AI. And, we've talked about Apple announcing Apple Intelligence, and it's been delayed for well over a year. Google, these announcements, as far as I can tell, they're not vaporware. They're available to Pixel 10 users immediately. And they start to show Google's strength in AI, baking in Gemini to the assistant. It took too long, but it's there. I think on the computational photography side, they've just upped the ante again. They're now claiming to be able to do a 100x zoom on top of a 5x zoom camera. And, I guess the proof of the pudding is in the eating, but they claim that their further advances in AI and computational photography result in incredible output from that. So again, it's not that they have the best cameras, but they have the best AI software on top of that. You mentioned Magic Q. This is really interesting because for those of you with longish memories, you might remember Google Now. I think that launched, let's say, about 10 years ago. And that was an attempt to provide this contextual, always-on kind of view. What we used to call it in the sort of academic world, we used to call it prospective search. So the idea is instead of you typing in a search and then getting the information you want, it's nearly like the search types in you. In Soviet Russia, search types you, and it tells you what you need to know at any given point in time. And Google Now kind of slowly faded into the history and just sort of switched into this fairly lame, I think, just what's trending tab, which is mostly just a feed of semi-relevant news. But now they think they're back. They think they have the chops to provide a really valuable service. And so it's worth noting, Chris, this is a second generation for Google of something like this, of a always-on contextual AI that tells you what you need to know. And I kind of buy that they're ready to do this. And so it will be really interesting to see how Apple responds, because I don't think, and this is not Apple's fault, I simply think the industry is mature enough now that there is nothing they can do in hardware that is going to blow people's minds. So it comes down to, what is this software experience going to be like? What is this new version of iOS, perhaps leveraging new computational capabilities on device, but what is the new version of iOS going to be able to do to match what Google are doing here?
That's right. Look, AI is a problem for Apple. We've said this over and over again on the show. Whenever there's a massive new platform shift, the deck gets reshuffled and new winners and losers emerge. The internet was a problem for Microsoft. It allowed Mac to emerge because a lot of your software and a lot of your experience was in the browser, so platform lock-in on Windows became less important. The smartphone was a problem for Nokia. As soon as the smartphone was the new platform, Apple had a chance to come in and launch and build the iPhone. They have no model. They have a privacy and people are listening and they go, "Oh, they have a model. They have this, that model, that." They don't have a model. They do not have a frontier model that works, that matters. They have a privacy first posture, and AI needs a lot of data, a lot of personal data, a lot of cloud compute, and they're futzing around with private cloud compute and this and that and whatever. Google is like, give me all the data. I'm going to stick it in my cloud. I'm going to tell you what you need to know. People are happy to trade their privacy for utility all day long. And so they have Google has the right posture. Apple has a very difficult privacy policy to get out of. And also Google has cloud services that work. I have been an Apple user for, 15 years now. I use Apple hardware and Google software. That's been true since the beginning, right? I moved my shitty Apple calendar to a crap folder. The Maps app, the Mail app. I move all those shitty Apple apps into the crap folder, and I replace them with Gmail and Google Maps and what have you. It's the first thing I do on any new phone. Okay. And so Google has all my data, and they're using it, and they're using it well. You mentioned they're removing the niggles, and they're saying that explicitly now. They're saying the quiet part out loud, right? They mentioned iPhone on stage maybe 2 or 3 times, and Jimmy Fallon was playing the straight man or the comedy guy or whatever. But he's like, "Oh my God, are you allowed to mention iPhone?" And especially the head of marketing. I could see her strategy in the way she was talking. She's like, we're proud, we're bold, and we have no reason not to mention iPhone. And you could hear the internal principles and being read out loud. It's like, we're not afraid to mention the competition, we're not afraid to compete. And the other thing that I could see from internal sort of dialogue is, we're going to stop talking about RCS and blue bubbles. And you could tell this is coming from, I'm reading the tea leaves, you could tell it's coming from her. It's coming from her new marketing strategy, and it's more human, more bold, less nerdy. And so she announced this migrate from iPhone feature. Then they've announced Snap to compete with MagSafe. MagSafe was a big, big thing for Apple users. They talked about blue bubbles and green bubbles for a moment, but only to say, we're going to stop talking about that shit. It's all done. And as you said, the camera 100x zoom with that resolution. Holy shit. That's really, really cool.
If it works.
If it works, yeah. Well, now what's left for me is 2 big things. Headphone switching. I only buy Apple headphones because they smart switch between devices in a way that is extremely intuitive and fast. And continuity, other forms of continuity. So copy and paste it between devices, airdrop between devices, continuity camera, and all this kind of stuff. And those things are starting, I don't copy and paste between devices that much. I have a dedicated iPhone here for my continuity camera on my computer. So I'm not really, AirDrop, I know there's an alternative to AirDrop. I'm not really sure what I'm holding on to anymore.
Oh, the fortress is starting to crack. That's dangerous. For Apple, that is.
It is. It's very dangerous. Yeah. It's really kind of the headphones and, the Apple TV and it's about it.
And I agree. And like that's a fascinating thing for me. And that's the battle, right? Because I do, like I said, I spent about 18 months in the Apple ecosystem, switched back to my Pixel device after that. And it was actually a big relief to be back on Pixel. I do think it is a better phone with a better operating system. But damn, I miss my Apple Watch and I miss my AirPods. Like, yes, I've got a Google Watch. Pixel Watch, not as good. I've got Android Pixel Buds, not as good. But the biggest issue is I don't work with my Mac, right? So there's this, like you said, there's this whole ecosystem piece, but the pull of the Google phone is getting stronger. And Chris, I would actually like to give Google some credit. I know I hang quite a bit of shit on them, but I also love them. I spent 10 years there. But for their strategy here and for their patience. I actually saw you recently posted on LinkedIn about Apple, about the fact that they are patient. They polish their product iteration after iteration after iteration until it's perfect. And Google have been making their own Android phones, despite the fact that it's open, it's open source, that Samsung have had most of the market share for all of that time. Google have been making phones. They had the Nexus series and they've had the Pixel series. And they came from a long way behind Apple. And the hardware wasn't as good, the software wasn't as good, but year after year, they polished and they polished and they polished. And like I said, the hardware probably still isn't as good. I think the software is better. But now you look side by side at the latest iPhone and the latest Pixel phone, and you say, this is now probably a matter of taste and preference rather than one being better than the other. And Google could have given up at any point along the way with their dismal sales, with the criticisms of their software, of their hardware. but they didn't. And I think now they're going to really start reaping the rewards of that. And that's what patience gets you. That's what very, very deep pockets gets you. I don't imagine the Pixel line has made much money for Google. It's probably been running at a loss for well over a decade. But here we are, and now I'm like, yeah, Google. If someone like Chris Sard is thinking, well, the cracks in my little Apple ecosystem fortress are starting to show, well, that is a credit to Google's strategy.
Look, I think the Android watches, especially the Pixel watches, look better than the Apple Watch. Yeah, I don't know about the functionality, but like just the aesthetic of it and the fact that it's round, to my eye, it is way better than the Apple Watch. I think Android looks better than iOS, especially with this stupid, liquid glass thing. I'm using liquid glass on my iPad. It's potato. It looks like crap. It just really, it looks dumb. And I thought, classic Apple, I'm going to get used to it and I'm going to eat my words. No, it doesn't look good. It doesn't work well. And so I actually think that Android looks better and just from the renders feels better. But the problem is, every time I try switching to Android, and this time might be different. I haven't used Android for 2 years or so. But every time I try, it's the little details. And the details that are typically inside the apps, not the OS. Here's my hypothesis, right? What I find is the tap targets are more finicky. And the what's called the lazy commits. So when you tap, let's say, the like button in Facebook, on iPhone it just goes blue. On Android, again, I'm now 2 years out of date, but it would sort of like it would go blue and go back, go off again, and then it would sort of go on again once the server confirmed, and there was like less lazy loading, and the tap targets were more finicky. And my hypothesis is that because Android is so fragmented, Android engineers have to spend more time with cross-compatibility than with polish.
Probably.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I find that iOS apps are more polished. And iOS is the platform of choice, platform du jour in Silicon Valley. So people tend to be iOS first. And so that's, if I'm honest, like it's not just the headphone switching and the continuity and whatever, it's being the first-class citizen in Silicon Valley apps. And that's what I struggle with. And I really, I'm saying this now 3 times, I'm out of date. So I'm going to buy an Android and I'm going to try and figure it out.
The gap keeps narrowing. Like there's still a gap, but I feel like even things like the software, the app quality, the gap keeps narrowing.
Yes. Now, the other thing to take away from this, Yaniv, you mentioned Samsung, their leadership, the Pixel, even though they build the platform, they've got their own devices. This is a lesson that founders need to take. I'm a developer platform guy. I've built multiple large platforms, and my philosophy used to be one of this purism, this kind of egalitarianism, which is if you build the platform, you're not supposed to go up into the application layer and cannibalize your ecosystem. It felt icky to me. It felt corrosive to me. It felt like it was conflict of interest. But what I've come to understand as my career has evolved and has become more sophisticated about this is that every successful platform has a very strong reference app on top, at least one from the platform developer. Intel, at the very least, started building reference devices, if not commercial devices. Microsoft had to build Surface devices. Android has had to build Pixel devices. It's just the way it goes. Windows had to build Office. Other than commercial reasons, growth reasons, whatever reasons, at the very least, what it does is it sets the bar. Google saying, this is what a great Android looks like. Android device looks like. And it elevated the entire ecosystem, and people had to stop building bloatware and crap, and they had to lift their game and to keep up with Google. So Pixel doesn't actually have to make money for Google. It just has to set the low watermark for the Google device ecosystem. And it's doing a fantastic job. So that's something to keep in mind if you're building any kind of platform or API.
Yeah, actually, a few things I'd love to unpack there because I think that's a really great insight. And you talked about the idea of a reference model, and I think that's true. For a long time, what Google phones were, whether they were the Nexus series or then the Pixel series, were that reference design that were there to basically to keep Samsung honest, right? It wasn't about making money; it was about putting pressure on Samsung to say, we're not totally beholden to you. This is what good Android looks like. If you move too far in the direction of bloatware and shitware, then people will leave you. They're not going to leave you for this phone on its own, but if you behave too badly, they will leave you. They use it in various ways to exert pressure on Samsung. But I think their strategy evolved from that. And this is probably about the point of that name change, right? From Nexus to Pixel. They wanted to make a genuine product in their own right that would win in the marketplace. And they have spent 10 long years getting to the point where that product can compete head on with Samsung, can compete head on with Apple. I think they're there. This is not a reference device. This is an ecosystem play. So that's one point. And again, I think it's one of the lessons for founders here is about patience.
You referenced my LinkedIn post about that. I said, why does Apple win? And it wasn't about Apple. It was about this recognition that whether you're Sony or whether you're Samsung or LG or whatever, or any, device manufacturer and some software companies too, you notice that they tend to just like make shit up every cycle. Oh, we've got the blue one and we got the red one and we got the PX7732-500. And it's like, what the fuck are you doing? And every cycle, there's a new device in a new category with a slightly different angle. And what Apple does and now what Google does, it took them a long time to figure it out. But what they're doing is they're saying, here is a map, a terrain. There's like the Pro, and then there's the simple one, the Pro and the consumer one, large, small. They got the headphones, we got this, we got that. And every year, it's going to get better. It's going to have the same name, with a version number increase, and it's going to get better. And we're going to learn, iterate, ship. And that takes years. It takes a discipline. And these other companies, they seem to like, every time there's a new middle manager is like, oh, I think I'm going to invent the new Pixel, whatever, Super Buds. And it's like, just make the next version of the device and make it better. That's it.
Yeah, remember that Nexus series of phones, the early Android phones, where every one was completely different from the one before. So there was the one with a curved screen, like a banana, and then there was one with a giant screen, and then there was a miniature one, and every one like different colors, different design language, and now every Pixel is the direct successor of the one that came before it. And that is better for users. All the best .coms are taken or crazily overpriced, so you settle on a workaround domain for your website. Don't compromise. Get a clean, sharp .tech domain that instantly says, this is a tech startup. Grab yours at get.tech/TSP for the Startup Podcast or via domain registrars like GoDaddy. The other point you were making about platforms, I think, is also interesting about that sort of cannibalization. It reminded me actually of this week's EDU episode of the Startup Podcast, where I spoke with Joseph Ruscio, who is a specialist VC investing in tech infrastructure platforms. And we spoke about open source, which Android is, right? And this idea, which I think is also really valuable for founders, that one of the ways that you can compete against an incumbent is by releasing something for free. And that gets that adoption, that gets that kind of center of gravity moving towards you. But then you can actually build on top of your own platform, and that can be quite often how you monetize it. I think I love the abundance mindset of this, right? The idea that by giving something away that other people can capitalize on, it doesn't mean you don't get to compete with them. But it's a really savvy play when you have a very entrenched incumbent, and you need to have a way of drawing attention and usage to yourself. Giving something away for free, removing every barrier to entry is a really smart way of doing that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Now, you mentioned earlier the proactive AI, the prospective search, Google Now. This is the future, okay? I think in terms of passive or reactive AI, a cell phone oriented around AI is going to be critical. That's the high bandwidth interaction surface. And glasses and earpods are going to be absolutely critical for ambient, always on interaction. Those are the future of AI in the general. But the future of AI interaction is going to be proactive. It's going to be this thing pinging you, saying, hey, Chris, it looks like you're running late for XYZ. Hey, Chris, I know you love this concert, this band. They're playing down the road. You should go check them out. Or, hey, Chris, what you just said to your wife is really stupid. You should really say something different there. I don't know how invasive it'll get and how invasive people want it to be, but being proactive. Oh, it's like, oh, it looks like you're calling the airline. Here's your latest, flight booking information. This is going to be a game changer, and we're going to wonder how we ever lived without it. Somebody once asked me, what do you think the future is going to look like? And I said, the key word is going to be more proactive, more ambient, more pervasive, more abundant, more everything. And I said, one of the things is going to be AR,
which is augmented reality.
Augmented reality. You look at a piece of glass for a kind of a proxy for the world. You look at a map, and then you look up and you have to map the data on your phone to the real world using your brain. And we're going to just think this was such an anachronism. Like, wait, you had to look over here at a piece of glass, and then you had to look up at the world and try to map the diagram on the glass to the real world. That is going to seem so anachronistic because you're going to expect it to be all laid out on the world.
Like, yeah, why can't I see through my phone? It's not transparent.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other thing that's going to be anachronistic is, wait, you had to ask the AI, you had to ask the software for things. The software just didn't volunteer it based on the context of your world and your life. Those two things are going to radically shift the way the world works. And, our kids are going to laugh at us that we ever did it any other way.
Yeah, there's that scene in Back to the Future 2 where he's in the future and he walks into the video arcade and these two kids are around like this retro, like cowboy shooting game. Pick up a gun and you shoot the bad guys on the screen. The kids can't figure out how to use it. And Marty's like, I'm good at this. Let me show you how to use it. He picks up the gun and he goes bang, bang, bang. And the kids are like, you mean you have to use your hands? And they just like walk away in disgust.
I love that scene. I love what it implied. And, it was always one of my favorite bits of that movie. There's a little bit of this already happens, and we take it for granted and we find it creepy actually, which is, I could be looking for something and I know I haven't even typed in a search or said it out loud, and my Instagram feed starts promoting it to me. I mean, it's creepy as fuck. And it's, and of course, when you do a search for something or you look up something and then those ads start to, follow you around. I've been involved in these things. They're called attention management platforms, and obviously ad networks. And the hypothesis is if the algorithm is good enough, it moves from being an ad to being content. If that's true, right? If I'm searching for something, I was searching for desks for my new office, and it started recommending desks to me, and that was useful. I wanted it to do that. Instead of being obsessed with, oh my God, my privacy and Facebook's following me around the internet, who gives a shit? It helped me find a desk. And that's what I want from my AI. I'm happy to trade my privacy for utility. And most of the people in the world are willing to do that, either because they don't know any better or because it's a trade-off they're willing to make.
I mostly agree with you. I just actually want to sort of refine what you said a bit and see if you agree as well, which is that I think one part of it is utility, right? You said people are willing to trade privacy for utility, but I'm thinking about the creepiness factor. It's not just about it being useless. It's about permission. It's the sense that you didn't give permission for these ad networks to track you in this way. You don't really understand how it works, right? Like, how the hell did that thing know that I wanted to buy a desk or whatever? And like, why am I getting ads on my Instagram feed? It doesn't feel good. But if you think about someone like Google or someone like Apple, it's very easy for them to get permission. I know that Google knows of stuff that's in my Gmail. I'm comfortable with that. So if I'm on a phone call and it's pulled my flight details out of my Gmail, I don't feel creeped out. I'm like, great, I don't have to go search. And so I think it's even more powerful when it's baked into a platform like that. I think the creepiness goes away for most people.
Yes, it's creepy when Facebook does it because Facebook's social contract with users is not that they're following you around. And when I first went to Silicon Valley, actually, the product I went to Silicon Valley with was an ad network, was an attention platform that involved the user in its attention profiling. It gave the user a visual metaphor that allowed the user to manipulate what we knew about them, to kind of say, no, I want you to know this, but I don't want you to know that, and to allow them to control their ad experience. And so it was a Facebook ad network with user controls. And I remember talking about the philosophy and the product behind that to the guy that founded the IAB and whatever over lunch. And he kind of wet himself. He's like, oh my God, this is the most amazing thing I've ever heard of. Now, of course, Facebook just went and did it implicitly and behind the scenes. But you're right. If you have an AI assistant and it's powered by your Gmail and your calendar and your maps and your browser, and you've opted in, and it is your personal relationship with your software, you expect it to know everything, you ask it to know everything, and you are delighted that it's helping you. That's a thing that, I'm going to say this in terms of how the public perceives him. That's something we don't want from creepy Mark Zuckerberg. We want it from Sundar Pichai's
Sensible Sundar, I think we can call him.
sensible Sundar, right? And Google. We just trust Google more, and that comes down to, you know, a whole history and a whole slew of reasons. But yeah, it is what it is.
I agree with that. So one other little kind of learning I wanted to take away from this, and to keep beating the drum on, you were talking about this proactive search and you know, whatnot. And I, for a long time, I've been saying this idea of AI as being a chatbot, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Like, I know it can be really powerful. I love my foundation models, my ChatGPT, my Claude. But I think about this in terms of design and in terms of UX. And this idea, design has gone away, that we just have this like super UX that is just AI, and you just type whatever you want into it and you get a response. I've never bought that. In fact, what I think is that for a vast majority of applications, if you are not OpenAI or Claude, the idea that a chatbot is the right way for your users to get benefits from AI within your context is very rarely going to be the right way to do things. You need to be thinking, when you are building a user experience, when you are designing, right? Designing is a human-centric effort. What is the thing that is going to help my user, my human, get what they want out of my product with the least friction, with the most delight possible? And I think AI opens up all sorts of new frontiers, new paradigms, new capabilities, new affordances. And I think the idea that to start and end with chat is as wrong as it can be. And I think it is much closer to something like these Google auto cues or whatever they're called, right? Where it is like, it surfaces the exact information you need at the exact moment you need it. And you get this fluidity to the interaction with the computer, with the product, rather than this idea of everything has to be like, I'm asking a question.
Yeah, you know, we've been saying this on the show for, you know, almost the full 2 years since the ChatGPT moment, which is chat is the beginning of the story, not the end. Most people have no earthly idea what to stick in that prompt box. And speaking about reference apps and platforms peeking into the application layer, ChatGPT was a reference app. It was not supposed to be the product.
Yep.
It was just a demo of what the underlying model could do. And so it is the beginning of the story. And it's actually interesting. Awkwardly and weirdly, I've just made this connection. I've just spent the last 6, 8, 10 months building these AI cues for a range of products that I advise. These ideas that there is this kind of AI decoration, these AI affordances in the interface that helps supercharge filling out forms or controlling properties of a analysis or what have you. And in fact, I'm literally in the middle of this right now with helping product managers and founders sprinkle AI into their UX in a way that is not just naive chat.
To be a pedant there, Chris, I actually don't think sprinkling is the right analogy, because sprinkling is something you do after the cake is baked, right? You're like, and that's part of the problem with AI, is it gets sprinkled on top. No, you want to bake it in to the core experience. And I'm sure that's what you mean, but I think that's an important distinction.
Yeah, I'm using sprinkling as a just a fun visual, but the idea is to thread it through the interface, right? And whether you started from scratch and baked it in, or you're adding it on top, it has to be woven in. It has to feel native, and it has to feel proactive, and it should not require a prompt for every damn thing. And it's a very delicate, very thoughtful UX problem, and it requires a real delicate and deft hand. And so, yeah, I think this is one of the next levels of design challenge. And yeah, Google is pointing in the right direction. And if you're a founder, a designer, a product manager listening to this, you need to be paying attention to that trend.
All right, Chris, that was a really great discussion. Now, speaking of helping people really bake, thread, sprinkle AI into their product in a way that is actually value-adding for their users, I know that's something that you just said you've been doing with a lot of companies over the last 12 months. So if folks want to work with you on this exciting new frontier, how can they do that?
Yeah, you can learn more about my advisory work over at chrissaar.com/advisory, or sign up to my newsletter at chrissaar.com/newsletter. How about you, Yaniv?
Yep, so I am on LinkedIn trying to make it a less boring place. I love getting connection requests from TSP listeners. I am also raising a pre-seed round for my own startup, Violet. I've got the first commits on my cap table from TSP listeners, which is so exciting. So I'm just going to keep beating that drum. If you are an angel investor keen to learn a little bit more about what we're doing with Violet, send me a DM and I'd be happy to chat. All right, Chris, that's a pod.
All right, catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by .tech domains. Naming your startup should be easy, but it isn't because all the good .com names are taken or wildly overpriced. No more. You don't have to compromise. Your domain shows your focus and intent, so make it sharp, clean, and unmistakably tech with a .tech domain. How do you do that? Head to www.get.tech/TSP or a registrar like GoDaddy and grab your .tech domain today. Get.tech/TSP for the Startup Podcast so they know you came from us.